Do you know if anyone ever calculated, because you mentioned how automotive is cost driven. So do you know if anyone ever calculated that by using open source, they are saving money or able to move faster, and how that boils down to either cost savings or increased revenue?
Yeah, it's like one element of it. So the easy cost saving element is just where you have commercial things and you have to pay license royalties and so on, and you find a way to use it with open source. You save this amount of money. That's the easier way, and you can even say, I take some of the money I save to invest into things again. That's how I calculated things last year in a business case. What we did in another project was we were concentrating and tried to build an IoT reference stack fully based on open source. And we started with saying, here's our reference implementation. And we tried to get this reference implementation spread over in Bosch. But if you just go with the fully created stack, you see that the people just want some part of the stack. And then say, okay, we like this, but for our use case, this container framework is not good. We want to go with another container framework. And what this means for the calculation, what we did is like we evaluate, for example, different container frameworks. The engineers were doing it. And after they've evaluated, so they took the first one, they took the learnings from it, took the second one, and so moved this forward. And they just estimated the effort, what it takes going from one to the next version, or to change a hardware platform. So they had one device, they tried it on another one. And this is not exclusive for open source, right? It's just like the general thing, but having a chance to reuse, which is much higher when you have an open source library and an open source ecosystem, we estimated the average benefit of 30%. So this is just like from what the engineers said, what effort they had, and it was somewhere just 10%. There were also some use cases for some company were 0. Another one was up to 50% faster time, and if you have faster, then you directly save effort. So it's both like it's directly in money. And the other story which we have seen, like for open source, it's just not, it's one example, and it's most likely not true for everything. We were going with an open source tooling, and an open source, it was related to the Linux kernel. So we had Linux kernel maintenance, tooling around this, build infrastructure, package handling, and so on. And we kept this open. And we were doing supplier sourcing. And we had our originally preferred supplier, but we found that it's quite expensive to keep. Yeah, we're cost driven. So we opened up an RFQ to look for a new supplier. And by just raising this RFQ, we could find 10 plus companies which are able to handle this kind of technology. And we could get offers from them. Of course, you need to find the proper offer, because it's not only about understanding technology, but also understanding the industry. We almost killed a company once by, that was their first automotive project. They just signed the contract. It was super cheap. We were super happy. And then we gave all the requirements, and they were fulfilling this. And what we didn't know was that we basically bound the whole, more or less the whole company, like 80% of the company were working for us, because it was a small company. We never checked the size of the company and so on. But therefore, we, in this like 10 plus companies evaluation, we checked, like, do you really understand? Are you capable? What are your proven points? But what we also managed, and that's the point here to take, we could achieve a 50% cost reduction with same quality by going with an alternative supplier, and even got also a very competitive offer from our original supplier, just because we were not bound in. And I had the other case where we had a proprietary software part, and we were really forced to use it. And we are trying to get a new feature. They gave us a price, and we were starting to discuss how much effort this would be, and that we believe that it can be done in a shorter time, and so on. And at some point in time, they just simply said, you know what? That's not the cost of it, that's the value of it. So you can decide if you take the value and pay it to get this value of the feature, or you drop it. And we had no chance, and we couldn't exchange. So we had no alternative. Our alternative was now to discuss with the customer that the customer doesn't need it because it was too expensive for us, and the customer also didn't want it for that price, so the company didn't got it anyway. That's just what happened. But you can really see, like, message 30% was time saving, effort saving, if you can have a reuse and go with open source solution from one to the other. And also with technology awareness, because you experience the stack, you get much more understanding, outreach to experts, like we discussed before with community. And the other part was like really 50% drop in prices for a supplier because it was in the open source space. So that's why also they still try like, if we have a solution, if you can buy this commercially, or you don't want to have a supplier, check if you find an open source product which may have your fit, find a supplier which offering something around this, and then see what offer you can get. And even if it's the same price than the commercial one, you may still be better and find a later on an offer from a competitor 2 years, 3 years later. And whenever they made attractive price, and if you just once bought you in, right, even for single vendor open source, it could happen that if you're in the project, you bought it in, you made some support contracts, nobody prevents you from raising your fees, license fees, whatever you put along with the open source code base, if there's no one else who can offer it. So then you're locked in again. It's open source, but you're locked. And that's a thing which need to be considered in this cost perspective as well.
Yep.
Those are amazing numbers. Thank you for sharing them. And it looks like it really shows that while the main driver is being cost effective to make sure that the company stays afloat and is successful and sustainable, but at the end of the day, you get seemingly a lot more flexibility and choice compared to the fully proprietary commercial solutions if someone decides to only rely on those.
But it could also end up, in the other way around. So you need to see what is your strategy on it, right? We were talking about reuse, lifetime, and so on. And it could even be changing from one open source stack to another, changing from proprietary to open, from open to proprietary. There could be reasons for anything, but you will have cost in changing technologies. And therefore, migrating a platform can be very cost extensive, that you can even say, I get a better offer from a supplier, but the technology, the way our things are implemented is different. But here comes the open source benefit again. If you are already in an open source ecosystem and the libraries are still maintained. We had this, we had to change to deprecated libraries. There were no maintainer anymore. And so these are kind of risks which you need to keep in mind. We haven't touched on this yet, but that's something where you need to estimate. And so recently we had a project where, I'm really an open source ambassador promoting the work a lot. And I saw the calculation, I saw the risk involved in the technology shifts, and they would have needed to go from a commercial existing stack to a new stack at a very ambitious time. And I said, you will have porting efforts, and you can master this. You can serve this from your existing team, from the people around there. And there was just no reason to go by open source in any case, because they had no expectation that this will also be the next customer on it, that there's a kind of platform that they can resell. It was like a one-time shot for a specific customer, and then changing to it with the technology they brought in. This is really like future technology. So they have already added complexity, and that if you add to this multiple layers of complexity, which you have, changing from commercial to open, at the end it could end up in it doesn't work, and then you will blame all this to the open source factor, right? You will not blame it to the rest, because the major thing which you see is like, I did it open source, I had all these efforts, I had all these changes, all these kind of things, and therefore I'm on risk. And what I really like is, and we had the Open Source Summit Japan, there was a Japanese car manufacturer which we were asking for a workshop, and they came up. It's not like the super heavy, fancy, we try to get things changed in 2 years, like some markets have, but they were just saying, we want to start with a proof of concept. We want to understand the technology, and we want to go for fit. So let's see if we can bring it in 2030, and not for the next generation, but the over next generation. So when we start thoughting the next generation, let us get this through to this point, and then being ready to go for the technology and understand what the implication of this new technology of the open source is, if it is a fit, and not rushing into a project right now. So I think this was a good way.
Yeah, I mean, managing that change, right? That's really the key because that is the expensive part. And like you said, if you do it for just one customer and that's it and you're done, then you don't get to amortize the cost of that change over something that goes much longer, right? But yeah, I think that it's a really good point.